So, hello to everybody. As David said, I'm in the base, in the very beginning, I'm a historian, a medievalist. But this will be my first incursion into literature, so just please be indulgent. Louder. Oh, louder.
I don't.
Okay.
Just recording it.
Louder. So, I will try to speak loud and slow, which is not my main point. So the paper I'm presenting here is called Anticipating Ruins, a Girardian reading on Ted Chiang's Story of Your Life. Any phenomenon of adaptation is a process of translation containing of a series of critical actions that involve transformation, choice, and abandonment. What Walter Benjamin describes as a translator's task consists of these actions without betraying the original and making it readable in a new version. This is the positive way of understanding the phenomenon of adaptation, but one could also consider this process as a form of incomplete destruction happening in the movement from one form of artistic creation to another, but also in the transformation of structures of thought or in the changes of social modalities of existence. In this process of transformation and destruction, the resulting work of art of the social fact can be considered as the ruin of the original, the mortal remains of a previous state. The result of the adaptation is what survives and makes it possible to return to the original. In his seminal Universal History of Ruins, Alain Schnapp has shown that the very principle of ruin is culturally constructed. The social understanding of the meaning of ruins and relationship between what is lost and what remains is not universal. Where Western cultures consider the principle of ruins as a material phenomenon affecting things, stuffs, objects, or landscape, other cultures apply it to human beings or social constructs. Man can become his own ruin and present himself as such, as an image that contains both his origin and end, his genesis and destruction. In this paper, I would like to address the question of man as ruins by describing an example of such a living and dying process. With this case study borrowed from contemporary science fiction literature, I will argue that the institution of existence as an image is at the core of what could be considered as a living ruin. This paper will first present the literary context of the case study as its cinematographic version. In a second part, I will stress the importance of visual elements building the living ruin by comparing the short story and the film. Finally, I will try to address in a Girardian perspective the presence of the human body as a fundamental principle of distinction between origin and end. I quote here, "From the very beginning, I knew my fate, and I have chosen my path according to it. But am I traveling towards a climax of extreme joy or extreme pain? Will I learn something minimal or maximal?" The almost last sentence of Ted Chiang's short story titled Story of Your Life wrap up the entire narrative and stress the main topics of destiny, freedom, and desire. U.S. writer Ted Chiang is considered as one of the most influential sci-fi authors of the last few decades, and Story of Your Life one of his most important work. First published in 1998 in a sci-fi journal, and in 2002 in Ted Chiang's collection bearing the same title, this short story is brilliant in its plot and narrative feature, and it addresses important contemporary concerns about violence and apocalyptic fears. The story begins in medias res when the main character and narrator, Dr. Banks, receives a call from the US Army after the arrival of alien spaceships on Earth. Louis Banks is a professor of linguistics and is asked by the military to lead an interdisciplinary team of physicists, mathematicians, and other linguists from different parts of the world to decipher the language of the aliens. The goal of this mission is to understand the reason for the presence on Earth. The story is told in Dr. Banks's intimate voice and intertwines the description of the current events in the scientific team with moments of the protagonist's future life. In the to and fro of the narrative, the reader understands that, as a fictional dialogue, Louise Banks tells her unborn daughter the central memories, anecdotes, and most familiar moments of the shared life. These intimate speeches alternate with the development of the investigation carried out within the research complex to decipher the language of aliens called heptapods. Dr. Banks and Dr. Donnelly a physicist and father of the unborn child, studied the oral and written language of the aliens in a dissociated way and tried to communicate with them. Relying on Freeman's physicist theory, Dr. Banks finally succeeds in deciphering this language and realizes that its structure affects her perception of time. Due to the very complex configuration of grammar, future is contained in the very structure of the alien language. The construction of every sentence encapsulates all the chronological implications of the declaration, and it creates an equivalency between speaking, knowing, and foreseeing. Ted Chiang's story, a deep meditation on language and time, raises from the beginning the idea of life as ruin. The personal narrative is a story-long flash forward on Louise Banks' daughter's life, but the events described in the present, because they are imbibed in the violence and uncertainty, already challenge the very unfolding of his life. As the story develops, future becomes past and avoids the present. A couple of pages after the beginning of the short story, we learn that the still unborn child already dies in an accident at 20. On the recurring topics in Ted Chiang's work is time and its relationship to the idea of origin. In the first pages of the short story, the intertwining of verbal tenses, past, present, and future, calls the reader's attention. Past and future merge in such a way that it is easy to get lost in a chronological labyrinth, in which characters are both already gone and yet to arrive. Louise Banks' daughter is not conceived yet, but she is at the same time no longer a child. Thus, she can be considered as the ruin by anticipation, a literary construction aiming to disappear before its existence. The narrative tension of the short story lies in the link between the content of the plot, namely the alien arrival threatening the fate of mankind and the child's fate. The reader is aware that the two are inextricable, I'm not able to pronounce this word, inexorably linked. The fate of mankind resting entirely on future parents' shoulder, whose child becomes a metaphor of the mankind resting entirely. Sorry, I lost myself. The reader is aware that the two are inexorably linked. The fate of mankind resting entirely on future parents' shoulders, whose child becomes a metaphor of their actions. In this construction, Ted Chiang minimizes the descriptions of childhood. The girl appears as the original and its ruin, but nothing in between. The narrative stops to let the dialogue between Louise Banks and her daughter anticipates her total disappearance. Ruined by anticipation, ruined by repetition, the inexorable ability of fate manifests itself in the very structure of the narrative.
Yes, please go.
Yeah, sorry. Denis Villeneuve has brought this short story to the screen in the world-acclaimed film The Arrival in 2016, deepening Ted Chiang's exploration of fate and destiny. The director chooses to elaborate on the dotted structure, but the film and the short story are not fundamentally different. It focuses on the upheaval of Dr. Banks's temporal perception of her life and its link with the cognitive transformation due to her learning the alien language. Nonetheless, the phenomenon of adaptation leads to a fundamental change with the translation of the child as an elliptical figure of fate into visual element. The very incarnation of this little girl into a real image, a human body, completely upsets and redefines the notion of ruin and its relationship to disappearance. Louise Banks' daughter is no longer a literary evocation, but she exists as a human body who is born, grows up, lives, gets sick, and dies. In the film, the child does not die in an accident, but gets cancer and gradually disappears. The repetitive motif of the ruin by anticipation of the short story is replaced in the film by images of life power. Each new sequence showing this little girl generates a new life, right here and right now. The visual portrait of the child's fate, leading to disappearance in the first shots of the film, transforms the notion of ruin, for it is shaped as a living body, part of a social life and yet programmed to die. All the dramatic tension of the film adaptation lies in the fact that the program ruin is a human body and no longer a literary character who only exists in the short story as the listener of the story she is told. Denis Villeneuve shots the scenes in which the childs appear with great care, even though they do not require any specific effects and no spectacular staging. In The Arrival, there is a contrast between the monumental, extraordinary, tremendously purified dimension of the alien world which never becomes a ruin, on the one hand, and the disconnecting simplicity of the scenes showing the moment of this little girl's life on the other hand. Moreover, the film and the short story insist on the fact that the alien spaceship leave no physical trace, no chemical or biological imprint on Earth. They are null from a material point of view, and only a supernatural phenomenon, a place of encounter between species based on language and knowledge. In contrast, all the scenes in which the baby, then the little girl, and the teenager appear are deeply embedded in the material. These house life moments, playing, cooking, studying, are caught in a sensitive incarnation of time. All the events related to the alien arrival seem disembodied in comparison with the material object-based glimpses of a child's life. Denis Villeneuve's talent led him to shift the dramatic tension from the extraordinary to the ordinary. What truly constitutes the film plot, namely Dr. Banks' learning a language that allows her a non-linear form of knowledge, is now inseparable from the moving image of a living ruin. The photographic treatment of the film is, as always in Denis Villeneuve's work, extremely meticulous and uses effective pictorial displays to signify the state of ruin by anticipation. As we move forward in the little girl's very short life, all the colors seem to fade. Images move from the saturation of the cowboy girl costume to the pastel tone of the rain clothes and boots, and end up with the plain whiteness of the hospital corridor. Images make it possible to empty the human body of its substance, to literally incorporate destruction into origin, and to transform the little girl's character into an image of ruin. This complex feature is supported by many smart details. In the film, the child's name is Hannah, which, spelling as a palindrome, bears the full circle between birth and destruction. The main theme of the soundtrack is On the Nature of Daylight by German composer Max Richter, which repetitive structure allows the score to be read in both directions. The alien writing system, created by graphic artist Martine Bertrand, is also based on circles, giving the sense of time deconstruction. I quote, "These questions are in my mind when your father asks me, want to have a baby? I smile and answer, yes. I move away from him, we hold hands and enter the house, make love, to make you." The last sentences of Story of Your Life make the narrative come full circle. They give the origin of something that has already disappeared, the complete state before the ruin. In the short story, the little girl dies in an accident in the mountain, whereas she dies from cancer in the film. If her mother can foresee everything as soon as she formulates it in the alien language, her desire to conceive a child who will die in a climax of extreme pain raises in the film many issues on fate, freedom, and trust. Louise Banks' decision can be interpreted either as an act of idiotic selfishness, when she lets her desire create an already dead image of herself, or as a gesture of pure confidence when she gives her desire the possibility to be changed by something beyond knowledge and language. It could be both at the same time, but in any case, the scenario, the careful photography, and the complex soundtrack in the film give the literary plot around the notion of ruin the physical status of an object of desire. In both the short story and the film, the transformation in the narrative happens when the little girl's corpse is displayed, when she achieved the final state of a character as a ruin. In Story of Your Life, the scene is staged with no precaution in a very clinical way. In the morgue, the sheet is removed from the body and Louise Banks identifies her daughter. Yes, she is. She is my daughter. In The Arrival, once again, the physical image implies a deeper and sadder construction in which Louise Banks first learns about her daughter's condition and then takes care of her in the hospital until both lie in the death. The display of the corpse as a ruin constitutes the moral entanglement of the narrative, for it is when all what happened and all what will happen merge in the redefinition of social roles. Foreseeing her child's pain and death does not refrain Louise's desire, but sharing her daughter's fate with her father after she's born breaks the parent union. Louise's child could be seen as the victim of her mother's desire and of her inability or unwillingness to prevent possible pain. The display of the victim's dead body, which provoke, according to René Girard, the reconfiguration of the social group, is crucial for the understanding of the anthropological relevance of Ted Chiang's short story. The corporeal ruin is the product of desire, and Louise Banks's enhanced ability to envision the future is responsible for both the positive fate of mankind, so she can prevent a global war between men and aliens, and the doom of her own child. There is no ruin of the first, nothing remains except her own knowledge of the alien language. There is a living body, anticipation a corpse for the second, a visual sign for the violence born of desire. René Girard's reading on the Greek tragedy in a mimetic perspective has pointed out the role of the victim's body within the social relationship, and Hannes's corpse in Story of Your Life could be compared with Polyneice's murdered body in Sophocles' Antigone, born of desire through violence, an object of violent desire between Creon and Antigone. I remember the way I feel when looking at you the day after you were born. Louise Banks tells her unborn child that she already remembers the future when looking at her, follows the only detailed description of Hannes's physical appearance. Louise remembers and anticipates by looking at an image of her child, at an image of herself. The intriguing time structure in Ted Chiang's sentences and narrative condensates the title of this conference, Desire Among the Ruins, and Denis Villeneuve's interpretation of the short story points out the role of images in the staging of violence, its memory and its appearance. This concern does not limit the realm of fiction, whether in literature or in cinema, and it is at the core of any representation of violence. Recent research in anthropology, especially in the field of anthropology of catastrophe or destruction, have shown that the victims' corpses are the subject of visual displays, both from the perpetrators, terrorists posting the massacres on Instagram, and from the victims, associations and NGO photographers working on the field to collect proofs of the crimes. In both cases, there is a need for images, a desire of representation. In a brilliant book, French philosopher Georges Huberman gives a comprehensive analysis what might be the only surviving images of the Shoah and stresses out all the anthropological implications of the making of this picture that show nothing but disappeared corpses. Blurry photographs of smoke, ashes and dust, human ruins foreseeing the anticipated and necessary ruins of the Endlösung. There is no direct connection between the Shoah photographs, which can also be considered as ruins in the dramatic turn of the events that led to their existence, and Polyneice's body embraced by his sister in Antigone, and Hannes's corpses in the hospital in the arrival. But those three ruins can be read in a Girardian perspective as a product of desire and violence. As is it always the case, this perspective is an invitation to underline structural phenomena between art and anthropology. This is what this paper has intended to do by revealing the ability of images to stage the human being both as origin and ends. Thank you. I did my best.
So much, 20 sharp minutes, exactly 20 minutes. So we have a few minutes for some questions, if you have the questions. Yeah?
I'm just interested in what made a medievalist choose this topic.
It's a long way. It's a long way from medieval literature to medieval art to contemporary art, comparing medieval art with contemporary art in abstract topics at home, because my husband works, he's a medievalist also, and he works, he's an art historian, and he does many research on abstraction before the abstraction. So we moved in between conversation, and I'm really switching into literature. So it was an interesting start point.
Best time.
I love the paper, and I wonder if there is. You're focusing on what on the ruin and the connection to violence, and I'm wondering if there is also another side to it that you would see in the particularly in what happens to Louise as she learns to understand this visual language and what it does to her perception of time, as you talked about. Is there some kind of recovery or putting back together of the fragments that does allow us to see some kind of restoration of relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way of saying. I mean, I was discussing with David because I'm not going to say that I only see ruins, but mostly also in Louise Banks's life, because I mean she's putting up all these memories. She's just narrating this, which could be yes, it could be something less with a little bit more of hope, but I mean there is the thing is that as long as your life is already lived in a way, so it's kind of a ruin. For me, it's mostly a ruin.
Yeah, I think taking advantage of your question and your answer, I think maybe it's when I watched the movie and after I read the tale, my impression was that the movie is much more highlighting the hope despite everything, malgré tout, as Didi Berman did. Those images, it was worthy for her to have her child, even he knew she was going to die with 10 years.
Stress
it is worthy.
It is what is more stressed in the film than in the book. The book, little space for hope. I am afraid.
Also, you have seen also this thing of the crash. I mean, the final, the death of in the tale, the death in the movie are different. Is the only change, more or less, the only change.
Yeah, the moment you get to know, when the concrete moment arrives, it's harder in the book.
Sure. More questions? Yes, Chris.
Thanks. That was great. What it makes me think of, what you raised earlier was about grammatical construction of time, and it reminds me of Wittgenstein's statement, the limits of my language are the limits of my world, right? So, but in the visual construction, you're stuck to a particular kind of visual language and so on. Not just make one comment. In Australia, there are Indigenous languages that have no relative direction. Everything is universal compass directions. That makes certain things very difficult and certain things very easy. But it also means that rather than the world always being oriented to you, you're always oriented to the world, in a sense.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in if you could say more about this grammatical construction. It's such an interesting idea. And that relation to ruins. Often when in English, when you think about ruins, you think about buildings. You don't think about people. Of course, it changes in different parts of the world. But can you say any more about that idea of language and time and how that constructs ruins differently, or?
So, no. The language, it's in the book. Actually, they spend several pages explaining the book, how it is constructed, and it's based in Fermat's theory. It's a physicist who actually I didn't knew at all, and actually the main direction is that you need to know where you're going. You already need to know where your final destination is in order to be able to create a grammar language in this way. So I think it's a little bit, I mean, as in the images or as in the story, in the narrative mostly, when you have to build in your head the sentence, and you know exactly where you're heading, where you're leading, and you have already lived what you're going to say. For me, there's the key point for living that's a ruin, already is a ruin.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. This paper is part of the same larger project on friendship that really began with the piece that published in the Spanish journal that they referred to. Friendship, I'm thinking, is one of our primary resources for imagining nonviolent ways of relating, one embraced by biblical revelation, but available in perhaps all traditions. We know from Dante's early writings that friendship was an important topic for him, and that he had drunk deeply from the major wells of Western thinking about friendship in Aristotle and Cicero, as interpreted by medieval Christian thinkers. His Commedia synthesizes and elevates these traditions in its representations of friendship as the fulfillment of human relations and relationship with God. Dante's poetic ambition makes him keenly aware of the power and dangers of imagination. Violence is easier to imagine than peace, for reasons mimetic theory helps explain: the persistence of rivalry and scapegoating in response to our problems. The Inferno displays the reduction of social relations, including false friendships based on exclusion, to nothing but mutual torture. Nonetheless, its violent imagery has made it an object of fascination. On the other hand, Dante seems to recognize that the inventiveness, the stretching of language and imagination necessary in order to portray perfected community in the Purgatorio and especially the Paradiso make them hard work for readers. One of the most powerful elements here is not a visual image at all, music as a metaphor of relationship. Musical harmony, voices that interpenetrate and make a larger beauty, is a particularly good figure for thinking about what I call the agency of friendship and how human agency participates in divine agency. By connecting the topics of friendship and music in the Commedia, I want also to suggest a connection between mimetic theory and a theology of participation, following the lead of Scott Cowdell's recent book, Mimetic Theory and Its Shadow, which we'll have a session on tomorrow. First, I will sketch what I mean by the agency of friendship, as opposed to individual or collective agency, and how Dante's treatment of friendship in the Commedia relates to his understanding of desire. Then I will consider what the metaphor of music adds to this understanding of friendship, particularly how it shows the potential for friendship to harness mimetic desire toward heavenly participation. There seems to be a tendency to distinguish between just two kinds of agency, individual and collective. Friendship, I suggest, is the ideal of a third kind of agency I will call joint. Joint agency is plural or shared, like collective agency. In collective agency, however, the will of each individual is subordinated to that of the whole group, of an indefinite number. While joint agency is shared between only two individuals or among a small group, in which individual agency is not so much subordinated or surrendered as augmented and fulfilled. Mimetic theory clarifies the importance of joint agency. A strong binary opposition between individual and collective agency leaves us with either the romantic lie of individual autonomy or a collectivity that can only be maintained through the scapegoat mechanism. Joint agency recognizes that humans are what Girard calls interdividuals. The work of Michael Tomasello posits that joint agency is a crucial stage in both evolution and individual development on the way to capacities of language and objectivity necessary for the collective agency of culture. In a minimal sense, the agency of friendship is joint agency that is cooperative rather than conflictual, the building block of a peaceful group that could be called a community rather than a collective. But friendship as an ideal gives us more than this minimum. It is our best word for the joint agency of learning, creativity, servant leadership, play, true freedom, where we are fulfilled as persons in relation to other persons, what Martin Buber calls the ich, du, or I, thou. This maximal sense of friendship and an inclusive community of such friends is what Dante helps us imagine. Girard himself pointed out Dante's mimetic understanding of desire as portrayed in the second circle of hell through Francesca.
Do I have that? Yes.
She tells how she first kissed her adulterous lover one day when they were reading the story of when Lancelot first kissed Guinevere. Dante likely alludes here to the climax of Augustine's Confessions, in which he is converted not into sexual desire, but out of it by reading a verse from the book of Romans. Dante sees reading as a way of receiving a model of desire. In Paradiso, when he is called to write about his journey through the afterworld, he says that if he did not, he would be a timid friend to truth. Dante's mission means offering himself through his poem as a model of desire that leads to friendship with truth, that is, with God and God's friends. The conversion of his desire as pilgrim narrator happens largely through the model of his guides on the journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven. Virgil, Dante's first guide, is his teacher and mentor, but increasingly becomes his friend, especially after they are joined on the way up the mountain by a third poet, Statius, who tells how he had been converted by one of Virgil's poems that medieval Christians read as an unwitting prophecy of Christ, another conversion mediated by reading. When Virgil explains that he was sent to Dante by Beatrice, he says she called Dante her friend. Dante's love for Beatrice had begun with what might be called a crush when they were both 9 and inspired his early romantic poetry. It becomes friendship here when she takes over as Dante's guide. The Paradiso tells how she patiently, repeatedly, and a bit comically says to him in various ways, "Don't just look at me, look with me, desire what you see me enjoying." What is he to desire? The end of their journey will be union with the divine, but the poem can only convey this goal through metaphors, which it plays with and piles up while acknowledging their inadequacy. At the end, it rests on geometric and astronomical images, culminating in the final lines, "But now my will and my desire were turned as wheels that move in equilibrium by love that moves the sun and other stars." Perfected desire is figured as circular movement shared with the cosmic order. The word translated here as equilibrium is a bit of a puzzle, but might suggest to us the problem of how equality and sharing of desire can lead to peace instead of rivalry and violence. This final image answers this question by condensing the rest of the images that the rest of the poem has unfolded. Dante's word for the motive power here, amor, encompasses all the kinds of love depicted in paradise, civic, scholarly, monastic, and more, and suggests a feeling that makes it more than caritas, charity. Aelred of Rievaulx had recognized in his 12th century treatise on spiritual friendship that the preferential affection that drives friendship puts it in tension with the universal obligation to charity. But he also suggested that heaven would give us unlimited affection for all and a time to enjoy it. Aelred sees the defining element of spiritual friendship as desire for friendship itself, and Dante, I think, would agree. Beatrice's office as friend and guide is to introduce Dante to a community of such friendship, played out through desire for other infinitely shareable things, like knowledge and beauty. No doubt Dante conceives the real heaven as a place of friendship, but as I am always reminding my students, the Commedia is not about what the afterworld might really be like. Rather, it uses a fiction of the afterworld to illuminate our experience of evil, conversion, and grace, bondage, release, and freedom in this life. What then can his depiction of friendship through the metaphor of music show us about grace, freedom, and holy desire? A recent study by Francesco Ciabattoni, titled Dante's Journey to Polyphony, lays out the general direction of the Commedia's references to music. The Inferno is full of terrifying noise and alludes to sacred music only through parodies that emphasize its distance from all that music will represent in the two canticles of salvation. In the Purgatorio, the souls on each level of the mountain sing liturgical prayers in unison as part of their penitential healing process, and an angel between each level sings a solo blessing on them as they move up. Starting in the earthly paradise at the top of the mountain, where he locates purgatory, and continuing through the heavenly spheres of the Paradiso, the singing, as well as the metaphors involving musical instruments, becomes polyphonic. There's long been controversy about what kind of polyphony Dante could have heard and invited readers to imagine. Of course, instruments that could play chords, such as lutes and organs, have been around for centuries. The study of music, as one of the 7 liberal arts, was all about the mathematics of concord between notes. But choral and ensemble music composed with multiple melodic lines was only beginning in Dante's time. Ciabattoni shows from recent research that the strongest evidence for polyphonic vocal music that Dante might have heard in his travels comes not from manuscripts of compositions, but rather from descriptions of improvised polyphonic singing in churches. Thus, we might imagine that what the groups of perfected souls that appear in each planetary sphere are singing is polyphonic improvisation. Of course, Dante also emphasizes that it is far more beautiful than anything heard on earth and surpasses his comprehension. So, taking advantage of how music has developed in line with the beginnings of polyphony in his time, we might project something like a Bach Mass, but continually improvised, like a jazz session, with each singer inventing in response to what they are hearing and discovering ever new possibilities of beauty and harmony. The basic principle of what polyphony signifies is stated by Justinian in the Sphere of Mercury. So much does living justice sweeten our affection, we cannot ever then take on the warp of wickedness. Differing voices make sweet music. Just so, our differing ranks in this our life create sweet harmony among these wheels. In this sphere, the emphasis is on political harmony as opposed to the violence of the Roman Empire, but the musical metaphor anticipates a shift to the more individual and interpersonal. Visual images tend toward a binary distinction between individual and collective agency because one physical body excludes another from any given space. A machine represents parts ordered to a larger whole, but subordinates the individual to the collective. Sounds, however, share the same space, and in music add up to a harmony without losing their individual voices. Music was understood to be about relationality. Dante does so much with it because relations between persons is what he is really interested in, individuals drawn further into participation in the relations between the persons of the Trinity. In the time that remains, I will look at two examples of how music accompanies the dialogues that make up the Paradiso. Two illustrations of the heaven of the sun capture the problem of depicting the agency of friendship. The one on the left from the famous series by Doré shows the two circles of scholars that appeared to Dante as if they were all identical and arranged in perfect geometrical order, the individual subordinate to the collective. The other, by Amos Natini, emphasizes individuality in the first circle of scholars. They do come from a range of time periods, nationalities, and fields of study. But how to depict both at once, a union of fully realized individuals? Natini's picture shows conversation, as if they were all participating in the best international interdisciplinary conference ever. Only one member of each circle speaks in the poem, however. Thomas Aquinas, the leading Dominican scholar, and Bonaventure, the leading Franciscan scholar. They perform a courteous reconciliation between the two rival mendicant orders. These speeches happen, however, during pauses in the song and dance that otherwise seem to occupy the scholars. The poem does not tell the words they sing, only that they praise the Trinity and the Incarnation in song that, heard from such sweet instruments as far exceeds our muses and our sirens, as a first shining its reflected rays. The dancing is simply described as moving in circles, but when they pause, it implies their individual responsiveness to each other. They seem to me like ladies poised to dance, pausing, silent as they listen, until they have made out the new refrain. I love this medieval image that seems to ask us to imagine these great scholars as, 8-year-olds doing circle dances in school. Improvised singing and dancing requires close attention to each other. This medieval image brings a note of playfulness and movement that, combined with the others and with the inconceivable music, starts to get at Dante's idea of community among the scholars, an image of friendship that can develop in a diverse group, like Cover, dedicated to the endless pursuit of knowledge. Academic discourse is further entwined with music in the heaven of the fixed stars. Here, the apostles Peter, James, and John come to examine Dante in the fashion of a medieval university on the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love. When James asks him what he hopes for, he begins, "The friendship God concludes with certain souls." Behind this must be the verse in John chapter 15, when Jesus says that he has called his disciples friends because he has made known to them all that the Father has shown him. Dante is being included among these friends as represented by Jesus' most intimate disciples. The theological virtues are the power to participate in this new kind of community, and each dialogue has a friendly tone, as if the saints enjoy hearing the pilgrim's answers and coming up with the next question, sort of like how mimetic theorists never seem to tire of hearing new explanations of the theory they know so well. Music helps convey this atmosphere of friendship. The apostles each enter singing, their words not specified, but each adding a new note to the polyphony. And after Dante completes each phase of his exam, the whole host of the saved that surrounds them bursts out in liturgical hymns, sung mostly in Italian rather than Latin. We are invited to draw on all our musical experience, sacred and secular, to project how this music performs the qualities he has portrayed in the heavenly community: joyful solemnity, high-minded playfulness, and perhaps something like what Scott writes of as vertiginous at homeness. It's a phrase from the recent book. Dante's examination on love gives one of the poem's clearest statements of how humanity is meant to participate in the cosmic order. When St. John appears, Dante, whose vision had been growing in order to accommodate the splendors of the higher spheres, is blinded by looking at him too hard. When John starts speaking, the dance and music cease. Thus, as Dante answers his questions on love, their two voices in dialogue are all he perceives, as if dialogue is the essence of love. He tells how love of the good and of God rescued him from the sea of twisted love, so that, he now concludes, I love the leaves with which the garden of the eternal gardener is in leaf and measure of the good he has bestowed on them. In the final canto, as Dante's vision reaches the infinite goodness of eternal light, he uses a similar figure of seeing in its depths the pages scattered through the universe, bound into one book by love. Love gives everything a new significance, different from what it formerly had as means to human ends shaped by violence. Conversion to desiring things according to the measure of their goodness is a new semiotic start for humanity, as in Tony Bartlett's semiotic understanding of mimetic theory. The dialogue about love here does not mention human relationships, surprisingly, but as soon as the pilgrim is silent, the sweetest song resounded through that heaven, and my lady chanted with the others, Holy, holy, holy. With this, the pilgrim receives his sight back, now perfected to the acuity of Adam before the fall. Human relations, then, are present here sonically, in the dialogue and in the renewed singing that pointedly includes Beatrice. This evokes all kinds of holy relationships at once and conveys something of the agency of friendship, individuals participating freely in a larger beauty, goodness, and truth. The traditional image of cosmic harmony emphasizes hierarchy, as in the speech of Shakespeare's Ulysses on degree. Take but degree away, untune that string, and hark what discord follows. Each thing meets in mere repugnancy, from Troilus and Cressida. Girard interprets degree here as external mediation of desire that inhibits rivalry. Dante's vision certainly involves degree, a hierarchy in heaven, but degree is in productive tension with equality to make the heavenly music, and the poem tracks with the movement of history toward the challenge of greater equality and its opportunities for friendship. Perhaps Dante's music can, in turn, inform our thinking about what I call the agency of friendship and what Girard and Chantre, in Battling to the End, called intimate mediation. Friendship as mutual attunement, the freedom of infinite play, truth as a matter of resonance, and reciprocal imitation of desire for relationship, the music itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much for just the time. Perfect. Sorry, Scott, you have to be strict with the time. So now time for questions.
Okay.
Curtis, thanks. That was wonderful. Question about, you contrasted the cooperative and the conflictual when you were talking about joint agency. And yet the conflictual is more redeemed than, excluded.
Right.
Aristotle talks about friendship originating out of thumos, out of basically rivalry. Right. And there's a kind of rivalry that's always present in friendship. And does that go away? Is that redeemed? I mean, how do you see that working? Friendship is a competition of it.
Yeah. Makes me think of the heaven of the sun and Thomas and Bonaventure, each praising the other's order and criticizing their own, as if the competition is in a way still there. They're cheering on, they're criticizing, Dante is criticizing through them, the Franciscans and Dominicans of his day, in a sense, urging them to a better competitive, better rivalry for what they should be truly seeking. So yeah, I think you're right. That is there. It's just it's maybe I need to say the cooperative versus the merely conflictual Because yeah, I think that is important.
But now waves, waiting have waves.
It is. Yeah.
It's not ingredient of a redeemed friendship.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. That's good.
Curtis, on the day of the first presidential debate, I'm just wondering how teaching this plays out in Michigan, and in a country where there's a lot of individualism and a lot of talk about collectivism, there doesn't seem to be the healing place for friendship.
Yeah.
Anymore, and the church and the university, which are potential sites for seeding friendship, often spectacularly fail to attain that. So I'm just wondering how you step as prophet into the public square with this theme.
Yeah. Oh, well, the first example that comes to mind, I like the institution where I teach. I think it's trying to do some good things. And the student development folks were having a little book discussion to try to get ready for the election season. A nice little book called Beyond Your Bubble. That's just about how do you have good conversations, healthy dialogue with the people you disagree with. I forget the name of the author of the book, but she really just articulates two principles that you just need to really want to understand the other person and help them feel safe. And
That's just by having you ask you.
yeah. The best I can do, I think, is just to think in terms of the desire for friendship itself, that the goal here is, before anything else, a community in the classroom, whatever kind of friendship among the students and with their professor is, appropriate, or, yeah, and the dialogue is what we're trying to do.
Yes. Next question.
Curtis, really, really good, very illuminating, very musical. Collective versus community.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate? That really caught my attention. So much of church is meant to be community,
For sure.
but a lot of church is more like a collective. What is Dante telling us there?
Yeah, I'm glad that resonated with you. It's something I wonder about. How do and I agree with you. That's what the church needs to be. That's the vision of the Upper Room Discourse, I think. I've started this community among you who I call friends, and your job is to build it from here. But how do we do that? How do we maintain a larger organization that at its heart is made up of these, where two or three are gathered, there am I in the midst of you. That's where it has to really be happening. I don't think I have practical answers to that, but that's the vision.
Okay, so thank you so much, Barthes. And let's receive the next speaker.